And now, the Big D and Bubba Weekly Podcast.
Big D and Bubba, they have a show 5 days a week, but they don't get to say everything that's on their mind, so they have an extra one, and that's how we get the podcast. The podcast, the podcast.
Oh, yes.
Big D and Bubba podcast, the podcast, the podcast. Big D and Bubba's podcast.
Jeez, Patrick, I realized you didn't really sing along because you know
not this time.
that Joe Gallanty is here, and so you really clammed up.
I did kind of like
Patrick
freeze
had
up.
started to sing, I was going to walk out.
Yeah.
Okay, so before we dive into everything, first of all, I do want to say thank you to Pickle Jar. Pickle Jar is the app and the sponsor, and if you love music, you need to download the Pickle Jar app. You can actually tip, you can show gratitude to your favorite artists and bands, and then support some really cool causes around town. Plus, you can watch exclusive content, got pics and videos and all kinds of stuff that you can't find anywhere else. Download the Pickle Jar app today at picklejar.com. It's good for your Droid, good for your Apple. Life is good. And yeah, now we get to find out why Patrick wasn't singing along with his little theme there.
I wouldn't either. Hey, I want to introduce one of the legends and truly an icon in our industry is Joe Gallanty, who is joining us for the podcast. Welcome, Joe. Glad you're here, man.
Glad to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
And
If you've heard that name recently, it's because Joe is about to be inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame as part of this year's class.
that's huge, man.
Thank you.
That is great.
I was trying to figure out how many just pure record label executives are in the Country Music Hall of Fame. Like, not counting like Chet, who was an artist and then became head of a label, but like just guys who were just in record label positions and then got in. I want to say maybe 6.
I don't think it's that high.
I don't think it's that many.
I mean,
maybe.
Fogelsong, Jerry. There was somebody else from the 60s.
Fred Foster, but I
Fred
mean,
Foster.
you know, yeah. So it's
You guys are talking names that I have
Yeah.
heard fleetingly, and I'm in this. I think for like the passive podcast listener, they're like clueless. Who are these people? I have no idea what you're even talking about.
Well, Fred Foster was the guy that founded Monument Records and signed Dolly Parton.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Jerry was the guy that followed Chet to run the label, and he produced Charlie Pride, signed Ronnie Millsap. He was my boss. So I followed Jerry in RCA. So,
and then you signed like a couple of guys, like I don't know, Alabama, you know.
How do you know? Like, do you know Alabama? And you're like, you hear an artist, and you're like, yes. Like, do you know immediately, or are there people coming to you giving you advice? Or like, hey, I really like this guy. Can you please take a chance on him?
well, both. I mean, you hear people. I mean, Alabama was at the CRS, the Country Radio Seminar, back in the 80s when they would have the New Faces show, where all the new acts would come out. There was a house band that was used. You didn't bring your band.
Okay.
So they came out, and of course, they were the band.
Right. Right.
And they were on MDJ, a small independent label, and had My Homes in Alabama, and you knew instantly there.
Yeah.
That was it. But we didn't know how big.
Yeah.
Because
I mean,
Alabama was also different. I mean, they were different when they came out because they were considered very pop. And I know now we look back and we go, there's no way Alabama is as country gets. But back then, they were very pop. And I guess that was kind of around that urban cowboy era as well.
It was a little later than Urban Cowboy, but the fact is that, the fiddle on the band, I mean, they were still country, except for what we had at that time, they were a little bit more pop leaning in terms of the way they produced their records. But Randy Owens sings, and you know.
Yeah. But I always think about, like, for somebody to see them and hear them for the first time and say, you know what, this is the future.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of a leap of faith.
Well, we had done a club tour. It was the first of its kind. We went out and took the band to the Bottom Line in New York, and we did the Roxy in L.A. and the Fox in Atlanta. We just went to pop clubs, rock clubs around the country, and brought radio people in because we wanted both formats to see them. The interesting thing, going back to your point, was that when we had them there, the pop guys were going, they're really country.
yeah.
And you went, okay, I guess I got to prove this to you. So, and then we did over the course of time.
How is your what's your impression or thoughts on the music styles of country radio today, or what it's been over the last say 10 years of how it's progressed and ebbed and flowed?
Well, the generations change. I mean, in terms of the listeners, so you follow those tastes. I think that there are a lot of outstanding artists. Obviously, you have the Luke Combs of the world, and at the same time, you have Morgan Wallen. It's interesting; they're kind of country, but I do think there's a little bit of a lacking in terms of I'm missing intros. For instance, I look back in the '90s and the '80s, and I heard you start a single, and immediately I knew what it was. Today, I find that there's a little bit more flow from one single to another, and I'm trying to figure out who it is.
Interesting.
Because back in the day we had those very distinctive guitar licks and things like that. And you're right. There's a lot more of the snap tracks. There's a lot more of just the.
And that's exactly it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I never really thought about that.
Doesn't mean it's bad. It's just different.
Yeah.
Well, the eras, no matter what it
Yeah.
is, whether it's pop music or country music or R&B or whatever it is, there are always whatever pops, whatever is the thing that is really hot for that moment. You find that everybody else will emulate that and copy that, and so you have a lot of music in the same era that will always sound alike, no matter what the genre is.
Yeah. So when you're running a label, like you went, kind of give us the backstory. You get to RCA, and you're running that, and then it kind of.
Well, no, you get to RCA in the
74.
Yeah, and you were not running it, obviously.
No.
How did you get from there to becoming the president of RCA?
The good old-fashioned way you do every job known to man, and you just spend time doing it, and people say, hey, you're pretty good at what you do. Let me give you some more stuff to do.
Well, I think this is also a good time to kind of run through Joe's background, because a lot of our podcast listeners don't know much more than they've just heard everybody thank him on award shows.
Yeah, it's a name you've heard, but maybe you don't know why. So so you was Chet the head guy when you got to Nashville?
Chet was still the head of the operation, and Jerry was like the GM.
Mm-hmm.
And I moved down in 1974. It was actually a funny story because I was doing really well in New York, and I was in marketing and handling Lou Reed and David Bowie, and everybody gets excited about it, but they were just new acts, and that's why I got them. Otherwise, if they were stars, I was not getting them at that point.
Okay.
Because I was just starting out. And came down here, and, first I had talked to the president of the company in New York, and he said, hey, we've got a great career opportunity for you. I said, really? What is that, man? He goes, Nashville. And I went, what? How is that a career opportunity? So they said, well, it'd really be great if you go down there and meet with Jerry Bradley. I think that you two guys would hit it off. Didn't happen. It was the North and the South. I mean,
Really?
Oh, God, no, it was horrible. And Jerry's had that attitude, like, hey, I'm running this company over here. Who the hell are you?
Yeah.
Okay. But it was a marriage that did work out, because I got back on the plane, went home, and I said, I came into the office, and I said, so what happened? He didn't like me. He said, he loved you. So you're going down. So I immediately went back to the office, my office, and I called down. At that point, we used to have what were lacquers. That's how you heard music initially, and the company was through a test pressing that you would get. And so the country acts, just like the pop acts, sent them to New York, and I started listening to the country lacquers. And it was Porter and Chet and Floyd Kramer, and I'm going, I mean, I grew up in New York.
Yeah.
I'm a rock and roller.
This is
you know?
really.
I mean, my idea of country is what's on pop radio. So if it's Johnny Cash and Ring and Fire, or Skeeter David, okay, I'm in. I know Eddie Arnold, Jim
Well, you were
Reeves.
just talking about you were dealing with David Bowie and those guys, and you're going from David Bowie to Hee Haw, basically.
Yeah. It's a culture shock. So anyhow, I came down here, and I spent the first couple of years just kind of watching and learning, and I was just helping out with the operation. And then one day I went into Jerry and said, these records, the way I'm looking at this stuff, because I had been in promotion in New York, I said, I think we can do better. And he said, well, you son of a bitch. He said, if you think you can do better, go do it.
I love it.
So all of a sudden, I'm starting to do promotion, and then the next thing was marketing. And then Jerry left, and I was basically the GM at that point, and they put me in charge of the company in 1982.
So what do you change about the marketing for country music? What were the changes you made?
Well, today everybody takes it for granted, but we were the label that did the first promo tours where you would take an artist to radio stations, or at the point we did, for instance, the Judds, we took them into studios and had radio people come in and, set up just like you have here. And they hadn't done that before. Long time ago, you had the Loretta Lynn tour that she did when she was driving around with Do. But most people only showed up when they were at a show. And we did an intentional visit to radio stations before the record came out, getting everybody on board.
Yeah.
And that went from that to what became the bus tours. We would actually take the artists out on buses and go from station to station around the country and kind of build our coalition. And,
And everybody still does that to this day. That's still the model for launching a new artist.
So that was some of the stuff that we were doing. There was a lot of things too. I mean, people were releasing records and they were putting a single out or two. And what we found out was, the more research that we did, that the time to release the album was when you had the record in the top 10, where everybody was really spinning it.
Okay, so I've always wondered why they do that. Please help me with that.
Well, I mean, when we did that, there were records in stores.
Right.
And CDs. And what happens is you get the maximum amount of airplay for the longest period of time because you're in hot rotation, basically power rotation.
Right.
So you're hearing this record, and then what we would do is take the artists around to those stations on launch in major markets and in syndication and just kind of go, okay, let's announce this new album is coming out. And that would support all the retailers. So people knew to go to the stores because here's your launch date. Prior to that, nobody was really doing it. And the other thing, too, that was different for us, when Alabama launched, Alabama was successful in the Southwest and the Southeast. There was no East Coast, and there was no really West Coast. And so chains like Tower Records, they really didn't carry a whole lot. Emmylou Harris, they would carry, Johnny Cash, but most mainstream country, it was like, no, we don't touch that stuff. And the same was true in New York. There was Sam Goody's and places like that. So we went up, actually Marlboro was doing a show around the country, and in Madison Square Garden and the Forum, and Alabama was on the show and brought the accounts out. And little by little, we built that coalition of getting music distributed in the East Coast and West Coast, which prior to that, wasn't happening.
Yeah, part of the music industry that's almost completely gone now is you used to have to convince retailers to stock your records. So, and I remember when I first moved to Nashville almost 20 years ago, there was a big convention. I can't remember the name of the company.
NARM.
But they would still come in and they would play shows. So it was almost like country radio seminar.
Absolutely.
You had to convince radio to play the records. And then you had to wine and dine the folks at the stores to carry your records. They only have so much space. So, man, no, I don't want the new John Michael Montgomery album if it's the early 90s because I've never heard of that guy. You had to
convince them that
basically
these were
sell it to them
wow.
as well, so that they would put it in their records and people would have a chance to buy it.
And the big change for us from a retail standpoint was the birth of Target and the birth of Best Buy and the birth of Walmart, because those guys realized that there was an audience as they went around to all these little urban markets, suburban markets, rural markets. There was an audience they weren't serving. Hip-hop wasn't born at that point, not really. And so they were looking, pop records are nice, rock records are nice, but we're missing this element. And once we started doing business in the country genre, the touring of our acts is nonstop. So they would get that support. We would do in-stores with them. You'd take Dolly out and do an in-store and there'd be a mob, same with Kenny or Alabama. And that was part of, just like to your point, Patrick, as we did with radio, we would do the same thing with the accounts. And then the next thing that happened was we figured out that national TV was important. And again, you have to look back until we went to New York in 2005 with the CMA Awards. Most of the national media put an act on, if you remember. The last thing they do is, David Letterman would come out or Johnny Carson would come out and go, and I've got Patrick, and we'll be back. We'll see you tomorrow night. And Patrick would play out whatever his song was.
Yes.
No couch time.
Right.
And Dolly was the one that broke through. She broke through with Johnny Carson, and because Dolly went on the air, and she came out in full Dolly regalia.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And so she came out, and Johnny's over there, and he's thinking he's a smart ass, and she just looks over at him. She says, I know what you're thinking. Johnny's got his pencil that he always used to drum with, and he goes, what? You want to know? She's looking down, and he's looking down. He says, you know what they call perspiration on them? No. Mountain Dew. All of a sudden, Doc Severson hits it. From that point forward, she had couch time all the time. But it was her manager, Sandy Gowan, out in L.A., who handled Barbra Streisand and Michael Jackson and Mac Davis, got her that opportunity. And then, little by little, as it always happens with our format, people get a little more comfortable. They don't think you got, a pointy hat on or something that's, going to prevent you from getting in other places. And that was a big change for all of us.
Ken Burns, in the biography he uses for you, for your part in the country music documentary, he called you the man who taught Nashville how to sell records. But the reason I think that's significant is because we think country music, I know country music from the 50s and 60s and 70s, but, the first million-selling album was The Outlaws.
That's right.
And that was in the late 70s. Like,
Yeah,
country
78.
music didn't... So before 1978, no country album, all those songs we know, none of that stuff sold 1 million copies.
Well, no, and the certifications were also different back then, and the prices were different too. I mean, you were selling records for $5. I mean, when I moved here, up until probably 80 or 81, the retailers and our own companies would not price country records at the same price the pop records were, because they thought
it was lesser.
Yeah, I mean, you got all poor people, and they got no shoes, and they've got no money, and I mean, okay, that there was a period of time where we were a really rural format. But when we started selling, 1 million records on Alabama, I went back to our distribution company and said, raise the price. And from that point forward, then everybody starts going out with the right artists. Everybody started raising the price, and then we got parity. Because that also comes back to you, because you have less money to spend on marketing if you're a lower price.
Yeah.
That's like insane.
Yeah.
Well, by the time we all met in the very late 90s.
This had already happened.
This was like old hat, like it was already, but
it was a given.
Yeah, it's just crazy.
It's almost like you know what you're doing, Joe.
But really, to have that vision and foresight.
Yeah, well, there's also a lot of trial and error. I mean, there was a lot of crap that we put out that didn't work.
I was going to say, it's a lot of making it
Let's
up
not
as
make
you
it all
go.
100%
I'm
here.
about to say, they don't put that on your Hall of Fame plaque. They don't
That's
list
the shotgun effect, though. You throw out a whole bunch of ideas, and a few of them are going to hit.
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing that I took away from what you said is it's about relationships. It's getting the radio and artists together. It's getting vendors and labels together. And it runs, and no matter what you're doing, you're selling records, you're selling widgets, or you're running for office. It's all about relationships. Yeah. And once you do that, people want to help the people that they know.
Absolutely.
And that's exactly what you're talking about.
And I think it's interesting, too. There's a guy that was on the CMA board named Charlie Anderson, who ran Anderson Distribution, which handled all the Walmart accounts. And he came on the board, and up until probably late 90s, our CMA Awards was always in October. And we were at dinner one night and into a bottle of wine, and he said to me, why do you do it in October? I said, October is Country Music Month. There used to be a part of the merchandising campaign to spread country music there was a month. And all the retailers would go, okay, we'll put country music in and then take it back out. And he said, if we did it closer to the holidays, like during November, we could buy a lot more and put it in there. So I went back to the board and the TV committee and said, this is genius.
Yeah.
I mean, this is really a good idea. And of course, all the other label guys went, hell yeah, we got to do this. And sure enough, you'd have the CMA Awards probably the second week of November. You'd go on, perform, big spike, come down a little bit the week in between Thanksgiving, pop up again, come down a little bit, go into Christmas, and then we'd figure out TV shows to get in there, launch a new video, single, whatever it was. And you really saw our format take off because nobody else had that slot for the holidays except the CMA Awards. So it really propelled the format forward.
It's funny, man. That's really funny that nobody else, and I'm going to notice now, whenever something is announced, I'm going to be like, what is this right in front of? What are they staging this for?
Absolutely. And we
because now all that thought is put into everything.
That's correct.
Because you taught them how to think it.
Yeah, and people, they take advantage of those performances, and, most of the time it helps.
That's crazy.
Okay, so you were at RCA from 82, all through the 80s. Then 1989. We all know in country music, lore, the class of 89 changed everything. But people talk about Garth, obviously, because Garth was a very big deal. But the number one most played song and the number two most played song on the air, both in 1989, were by Clint Black. Like, Clint Black may have been the first real 1989 star to break through and change the mold. Did you see something that that was going to be this game-changing sound, or did it just another guy that was pretty good and we made a record?
I mean, he is a great singer and one hell of a writer, and that initial album, Killin' Time, is one of those iconic records. And the interesting thing was I was having lunch with Jimmy Bowen, who was the guy running Capitol, had Garth. And Jimmy said to me, he says, yeah, I got this guy that's on the label, and he says, he's from Oklahoma, and he's got a hat, and, and all this kind of stuff. I said, well, when are you putting out the record? He said, oh, I'm going to probably put it out this summer. Well, we were going to put Clint out this summer. That summer, too. So I went back to the office, called a meeting, and said, we're going in 30 days. Let's get our shit together and go.
Yeah.
And so when we had the ACM Awards, Clint had all those nominations, and well-deserved because the singles were spectacular.
Better Man, Killing Time.
Yeah.
They were
No news. Yeah. it was off the charts. And, the touring was starting for him. And then, of course, Garth came out right after that. And you had the Alan Jacksons of the world. And I think Travis Tritt was in that class. These are great singers with some incredible records. And that really started to propel, the move forward with those acts and the new class. It was a breakthrough for all of us.
Who all was in that class?
Alan Jackson, Garth Brooks, Clint Black, Travis Tritt, and I feel like there's always somebody I'm forgetting. But I think there's mainly those four guys. And really, there was a shift. You think of everybody who came after that, but there were very few guys that were before that held on. The acts that made it into the 90s from before that are like Alabama, Randy Travis, George Strait, and most of the country music. You go pull up the chart in 1988. Go to Wikipedia and look at the number one songs in 1988, and you'll go, oh, yeah, they weren't playing any of these guys in 1990.
And those were all country. There was nothing pop about that.
Yeah.
So 1988's biggest star was Merle Haggard.
Oh, wow.
And by 1990, nobody was playing him.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right.
Completely.
You had
it was the shift.
Ronnie Millsap, Dan Seals, Roseanne Cash.
Okay. Yeah.
Randy Travis actually was
like
still around.
Randy Travis,
Right.
George
Judds,
Strait, and Alabama.
Reba, George Strait, and that's it. Everybody else was like
Reba, of
Eddie
course.
Rabbit and KT Oslin and Eddie Raven and huge shift.
KT came in 88, and then Clint was 89, and then I moved to New York in 90.
So, sidetrack. You went to New York and ran
All the labels, the pop, the R&B, jazz.
Wow,
nice eye roll there. What's the jazz president?
Our label was called Novus, and they had more acts. They must have had 15 or 20 acts on the roster, and jazz is a specialty area, and if you get to 100,000, you're having a party. And when I got in there were almost 90 acts that we had, and I dropped 60 of them.
Wow. Man, they loved you, didn't they?
Well, but the reality is nobody ever heard from them.
Right.
Again, those acts that we dropped, 5 of them got signed by other labels. Nobody heard from them either. It was just, it's a game of signing to a large degree because you sign these buzz bands and everything else, and then you start trying to build a roster from there. But the jazz was not my forte.
What is the ratio of because I've heard Patrick has brought it up sometimes, it takes several artists, several different bands, whatever it is. What is it how many do you sign to find the one that actually breaks through?
I'll tell you the story. So Rick Pitino was our guest speaker when I was running the labels in New York, and it was probably 92, and we had our annual convention, and so I got up there, and I'm playing all the new music from the R&B department and from the pop department, the rock department. I don't know, played 25 records or whatever, artists. And, I was up there telling the staff, if we can get 4 or 5 of these through, we're going to have an unbelievable year. I get down, I'm talking to Rick Pitino, and, how's it going, blah, blah, blah. And he says, he said, I just want to tell you one thing. He said, if I went with those stats, I wouldn't have a job.
Yeah. In sports, if you're other than baseball, you can get a hit a third of the time and be very successful, but you got to have more than 30% win ratio. So,
yeah, I mean, our business is, maybe you're hitting 10%, maybe you're hitting 15%.
Why is that? I mean, does anyone know? Is there any kind of has anybody ever studied and said, why does somebody make it through and all these others don't? Because I hear so many, over the course of the 2+ decades we've been doing our show, we've had some amazing singers come through here.
Yeah,
that we never heard from again.
But if it was just singing, that would be easy, but it's not. We were talking about it the other day where I just came back from the CMA board meeting in Chicago, and there were several of us there from agency and management and just talking about artists that were successful for a moment. And then, problems with marriage, problems with alcohol, problems with I just don't want to work this hard, problems with I'm going to write everything as opposed to finding the best songs. Just it's all those things. There are a lot of little things in there that add up to be big things because there are lots of great singers that come in this town. And sometimes not the best singers making it to the top and staying because they're good singers, but they're stylists. But they find those songs that we all go, oh, that's great. Because you need a bunch of great, because otherwise you just, you become forgettable.
That's
you have
fascinating. But because the whole star thing, how you become a star, it's like a crapshoot.
And has it changed now with like TikTok and all the viral video stuff?
Yeah, I think the barrier to entry is lower than it was before because when I was running the labels, we had 24 acts, maybe 25 acts, and we were running probably 35% market share. Today, the labels are running on average somewhere between 34 and 36 acts, and they don't have that kind of market share because you're getting acts that truly aren't. You think about who's in the Hall of Fame in terms of those artists. They worked the road. They built those songs. They built shows. You got somebody that comes on. Nothing against TikTok or any of the other
that's closer.
Digital platforms. But the reality is, you're not fully formed as an artist.
Right.
And you also get people who are hot right now.
Yeah.
And they might not be for, much longer than that moment.
Well, it's interesting you say that because just a couple weeks ago, I met a woman who had been on one of the shows, one of the competition shows. She didn't win or anything like that. But when she heard, oh, you live in Nashville, and let me give you my card. I said, well, what are you doing? Do you have a Facebook page? Do you have a TikTok? And the problem is she'd been on this one show and she thought that was going to be it. And I can't say to a person the way you could that, honey, put some work into this.
Yeah, you got to.
She just thought someone was going to show up and be like, well, you were in the top 50 of something, so here's a record deal. No.
Well, I think it also changes. People come in and say, oh, I've got 2 million streams. Well, Patrick's got 7. You've got 10. The numbers keep changing. And again, I always used to say when we went through this, that shows that I like you. Doesn't mean I love you.
Right.
Love you is I'm buying tickets. Right. I'm showing up for your merch. And that takes time, and you've got to get out there.
Think about, really whittle it down, what album you were going to buy. Yeah. Like I saved my money, and once a month I bought a record, and that was I had to really decide who I wanted. But and once I bought it, that was it. I can only buy that record one time, so you're only going to get one number out of me. Okay, now, one person, like you said, one person can stream a song 200 times.
Yeah, and there's a difference too between
that's just one person.
But streaming today, you can just click a playlist and just, okay, I'm done.
Yeah.
As opposed to engaging when you bought a record, you knew the cuts on the album. Today, you may know some of the music, and then you may not know the rest of it.
I also felt like I owned that.
You did.
I was invested in that band, and there's a lot of people that I stream that I don't care.
That's why I say love versus like. There's nothing wrong with it. It doesn't mean that you cannot have a career, but to last, the names that we're talking about, you have to be able to do that at a different level. You just, but again, it doesn't have to be, Kenny Chesney used to always bust my chops about You know how many number 2s I got? Yeah, and I know how many number 1s you got too, you know? And they can't all be one depending on what you're competing against. Eric Church, Miranda Lambert, they don't all have straight number 1s. There are artists that have one number 1 after another, but Eric Church and Miranda Lambert will pull more tickets, have a longer longevity, just because they have those kind of songs. And, you know, you guys are in this business. You know how the charts work, and there isn't always there's a logic behind how they get there, but there's not always a reason for them to be there.
Right.
Yeah. What's the? Is it a tough conversation to have with an artist to discuss shelf life for them? Of like, hey, you know, there's going to be a big bang and big boom, and then let's take it as long as we can, and then eventually the wave's going to die, and you'll be back in the water, and not, you know.
Yeah, unless you do something.
Well, even if you do something, I mean, I've had a lot of people I've had to drop over the years, you know, just drop them from the roster because there's nothing else to be done. You know, we've changed producers, we've changed writers, you know, but we've gotten to a certain point on the chart where people are not responding. My attitude always was, if I get you to top 25 and I can't find any kind of reason for people to pull in and do that a couple of times, then, you know, you got to go find someplace else, because I'm not clearly doing something right and our combination's not working. And, you know, that's just life. I mean, it happens in sports. It happens. It's what goes on. And I think that the ones that do listen and go, I get it. You know, let me go to work on this, you know, and they find new co-writers, or they bring in some songs, or the A&R department comes in, or you change the producer, and they build a show. I mean, all those things go into it, but it is a job. It is not just a hobby. If it's a hobby, you're not going to succeed, because the people in this format that are competing, they're serious, you know, and you've got to go after it that way. And I think that some people have outworked other people and had better shots at success just because they do the work.
Yeah.
Yeah, it comes back to the Garth Brooks thing. I mean, clearly Garth Brooks has magic. There's something about him that is special, but also he worked it. Like,
he worked it,
you can
and
see
he's
it,
smart.
the guys who do that.
Like Taylor.
Yeah. Taylor Swift did that kind of thing. You know, you mentioned, we talked a lot about Alabama. I know they went out and hammered, but did you have a lot of guys, or at least some people who just, the record deal was the goal and then it kind of falls off?
Yeah, that's the conversation we had the other day. They get success and they get comfortable in it. They don't want to do what they need to do. And sometimes, you know, you have artists that get in and get the success and they go, this is not what I thought it was. This is way too much for me. It's too much in my life. I have no personal space, because it is. You have people in your life. I mean, our job is to get you the exposure. Sometimes we don't know when to turn it off, and there can be overexposure, and you can wear people out. I mean, Shawn Mendes said, hey, I got to take a break. You know, I got to get off the road. I can't do this. That happens after you've been running at it hard. You know, it's a difficult life. And, I mean, people see all the good stuff, and, yeah, that's there, but they forget going through. You know, you're sick, you're going to play. People are out there. I don't care how you feel. You're going to do your best to get out there, and it's one
Go
day
dance,
after
monkey.
another.
Yeah.
How do you have a list of how many people hate you? Like, because well, you have to have. Well, you must be like a.
Is there some
growing
self-awareness? Like, well, I know that guy.
Oh
doesn't-
yeah. You see him at a party, and you're like, oh god.
I used to get that stuff in the mail, too, from people. You know, hey.
Yeah, because you got to have a thick skin, because you're the boss. You're the one. It's
Firing somebody is hard enough, but firing somebody whose job is basically based upon ego must be ridiculous.
Well, I think the thing is that there's a difference when they feel you've done what you said you were going to do and it didn't work, as opposed to just going, no big, let's move on. And you know, that's why our roster was really tight. We didn't sign somebody just for the hell of it. You know, it really was. We have a plan here between all of us, the manager, ourselves, the producer, and and the artist, obviously, and you try to execute it. And sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't. Because again, I think the number I saw the other day, there are 70,000 tracks added to Spotify every day.
70,000 songs.
gosh.
Just in general?
Yeah.
Every day.
Every day. And that's just Spotify. It leaves out.
How do
Apple
you
Music.
break through that? It's the same thing as YouTube. There's like they say there are a million videos
That
posted
does
on
not-
YouTube every day. Like how do you?
Doesn't include that. Doesn't include podcasts. It doesn't include Netflix. I mean,
Oh my
the
gosh.
amount of media that we're being pushed with. And in fact, the other day I read an article that talked about the algorithm, which we all know is how songs are picked. And sometimes that's how you wind up with your, oh, you're going to like this on Netflix. It's the algorithm that looks at your likes and says, the thing it said was, okay, this tells me what I like, but it doesn't know what would be unexpected that I would like because it doesn't show up. And that's where you get that magic where somebody shows up the other day, like Morgan Wallen. I mean, he's nowhere, anywhere, and then boom.
Yeah, how does that happen? How did that happen? Morgan was he was around and he played and it was fine, but it was like kind of like and then all of a sudden it really seemed like overnight.
And it was before the controversy. So
Oh, yeah.
something
Oh, yeah.
happened.
Oh, it was-
something
The
there was,
songs.
there was a shift.
The songs,
was the
the
songs.
songs are that good.
Yeah. And then he's, he was part of the generation that came up and he was able to get on social media and, his team helped him get there and you'd get more content from him. People felt he was accessible. And I mean, the records, that album is a great album. I mean, it's chock full of great songs. So, but that consistency, I mean, the thing that we all understand today that is different than before in the digital space, you have to keep feeding the beast. You can't just stop. People want more. Give me more. What's the alternative version? Is there a mix that's different? Is there a new track that you're doing? Can Patrick and I get together and play? You keep it going. And that's part of what the burnout is too. Because in order to keep moving forward, you keep putting that stuff out. And if my personal opinion is that it's not a bottomless pit in terms of creativity for all these acts. They do need a break. They need to go away sometimes and go, whoop. I want to feel that. I mean, Kenny now on the road, he is so excited about being out there. But there was a period prior to COVID where it was like, man, I've been doing this for like 30 years, the same old, not about the audience, but the grind of going through everything.
So I want to go back to the Morgan controversy, and we're not going to address that. What I would like to bring up is, with Kenny and Tim, they stole the cop horse, remember? And there was all this drama. And then you got the Morgan thing. When something crazy like that happens and an artist goes through an event that looks like it can be, career ending, how do you turn that around and say, we've got way too much momentum. We've got to find a way to push through whatever they've done that was dumb.
Well, that particular incident gave us the opportunity to get on Tonight Show with Kenny. That was his first major TV appearance. So
because he blew up after that. After that, it was over.
But again, we had
like over in
how
a good
Forever
way.
Feels. There were songs coming that supported that, and he was growing in terms of tickets, and that just kind of pushed it. I remember when I moved back to Nashville, and Martina came out with Independence Day. And everything was out there with OJ, and people took that song on Independence Day and put those two items together, even though it had nothing to do with it. I mean, in the way it was written,
Right.
But it propelled that song to another level. So it's strange coincidences come up, and you take advantage of the opportunity. Sometimes you want to hide from it too. You just don't want to be out there. I mean, Morgan went through that where it was just like, you've got a target on your back, and we're going to keep on firing from so many places.
Yeah.
What's the craziest time you've been in bed and you get woke up by a phone call and someone says, "Okay, Joe, I have to tell you something.
It can't wait till tomorrow."
I've got to tell you now."
It was funny because this is probably, it was 2001, and I normally don't keep my cell phone on by my bed when I go to sleep, and that night I did. And Alan Jackson's manager, Nancy Russell, called, and she had a conversation with the Grammys about the potential to get Alan Jackson on there. And she just went off about, we got to get this goddamn done. And I'm lying in bed, and I'm like, what? What are we talking about? Who did you talk to? Trying to get the whole thing together. And so then I followed up the next day with the guys that Ken are looking a lot. And so I'm talking to him, and he goes, Well, if you can cut that song down from 5 minutes down to 3, where were you when the world stopped turning? You know, we'll get you on the show. And I said to him, Ken,
Wow.
where the shit do you think I'm going to... First of all, you think I'm going to talk to Alan Jackson about that? That's the first part.
Right.
Second part, if Alan was completely off his rocker and decided to consider it, what part of the song would you cut?
Right.
Yeah, nothing.
No answer. He did the performance. What was interesting, because that's in February, post-award show in November, when we came out and did 500,000 records that first week, #1 for 6 weeks. We thought the world knew it. He went on that show. Record took off again because most people that were outside of the country format
Didn't know.
had never heard it.
Didn't know it.
Really?
Did not hear it.
So it had 2 lives.
So as
Yeah.
big
Oh, yeah.
as that song was, it actually hit.
It was.
Wow.
It was. That was one of those moments on the award show that changed the dynamic about an artist.
Can
career.
you imagine if people? I said this when Chris Stapleton and Justin Timberlake
Yeah.
happened, because they sold 150,000, I think, downloads in 25 hours before there was the number. It had 25 hours from the moment they were off stage until the chart closed at midnight Thursday, and they were #1. It was the #1 song and the #1 record in the country. That was when people were still downloading. Go and pay $10 and download
Well, I
the
went
record.
to see him the other night in Huntsville, Chris Stapleton. And during the show, he goes, and here's my first single. It got all the way to number 46.
Yeah.
You know?
But I think
Right.
think about what if Alan Jackson had done that song. If back then people could have just gone to this computer in their hand and downloaded that record, how many singles would you have sold
You've
that
gotten
minute?
on a lot more playlists.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, it is
It was
what it
still-
was.
yeah.
That was the platforms
And that
that you
was
had to
still
deal
big.
with. Oh, God, yes.
Was there I mean, if you're comfortable saying that, who's somebody that you thought was going to be, or you're shocked wasn't a bigger star? Is there anybody that you just were sure was going to break through and it just didn't work?
It's strange, but I thought the Warren brothers.
I did too.
I mean,
I
I
did
thought
too.
those guys they were hysterical,
Mm-hmm.
they were musical, and they were great in terms of what they were able to put together. We just never got the songs right.
But
And
the
then
funny
they
thing is
became-
they've written some of the best songs.
And that's exactly what changed for them. They started writing with other people, and it just changed the dynamic. And now, I don't know, 100 songs that have been on radio over the years are written by those guys. And I signed those guys 3 times. I dropped them, signed them again, dropped them, signed them again. You know, it was one of those things where you kept going, God, we can get it right this time, can't we? And part of it at that time, and they will tell you this, they were drinking, and that didn't help the issue. They both have gotten sober.
yeah, but
and
they were
it's
fun
changed.
back then.
Oh,
I remember those days.
you
and
know, I
loved
think the
hanging out
funny
with
thing
them.
about that is they thought they had to do that to be funny. They actually are funnier now.
Joe,
I
I
mean,
was-
oh my God.
Joe, I was with Brett and his wife and my wife, and we went to have dinner at one of these Japanese steakhouse kind of places in Cool Springs. And we'd finished dinner, and we walk outside. We're waiting on the girls. They went to the bathroom. We're waiting on them, and we're just standing out on the sidewalk outside the restaurant. You know, have those koi ponds outside and that kind of thing. Well, Brett goes, man, you know these things will eat anything. I said, yeah, I've heard that. So he goes,
Oh my God.
gets a lug, spits it in the water, and
they
these
attacked
fish
it?
come up, and I'm going, oh my gosh! And about that time, you hear someone go, and we look, and we didn't see the outdoor seating area. He had just done that in front of like 5 tables, and they were all staring at him, going, "Really?" I texted him the other day. He goes, "Dude, that's still one of the funniest things I think I've ever done in my life."
I'll go out on a limb and say one that you had a part in a later iteration, and I don't mean to diminish this guy's career because he's had a good career, but I think we all thought Pat Green was going to be.
Yeah.
Like in 2000, when we first met him, we all thought he was going to be a superstar. I thought it was going to be the biggest thing ever.
When we toured with Kenny, he knocked it out of the park. I mean, Kenny would often say, "This is who you want as an opener." He gets them out of their seats, and he is an incredible performer. He still is an incredible performer.
It's not that he wasn't a hard worker.
No,
was it just,
but we just never found the songs. When he was in Texas, those songs resonated, and when we took him away from, it's like kryptonite and the other. You try to make somebody who isn't really country into a country act, and he wasn't. I mean, he was just a great entertainer and works really well there and could continue to do it. Morgan Hayes, Chris's wife, when Renee Bell, who was an A&R, brought her to me, I thought, this is exactly what this format needs. And, we put several singles out, brought them to radio conventions, and I thought, what the heck am I missing here? And I still, she's a hell of a singer, hell of a writer. Mm-hmm. There were other people that were out there that they just didn't want to make room. I mean, at the end of the day, there is a finite amount. There's not an infinite amount of spaces to fill.
What does country music need to do moving forward, do you think?
I honestly think that the reality is that we're kind of pushing, how to say this? I feel like we're getting comfortable with sound as opposed to being a little bit more original and taking chances everywhere. And, you kind of try to fit the box, and that is reinforced by the algorithms and what people think. The difference was when we were a label even in the digital world, through CDs and downloads, when you had success, you saw things really spike. You saw sales increase, and you felt that. Today, that's less so, because I think people, to our point earlier, are just listening laid back, not actively. And again, if you just listen, I went up to my grandson's graduation of the day, and my daughter and her friend were in the front seat, and they had the radio on, and I'm just kind of listening, and I'm going, this just runs together.
Yep.
It just runs together. What makes it different? Not that anybody is bad, but if you're just going this way and there are no peaks and valleys, musically, I think that's an issue. And that's part of the reason why I think you look at the 80s and 90s and people are so nuts about catalog, because of that differentiation. There are a lot of great acts in the format, but again, we're putting out more than we ever have before. So as a listener, sometimes I think there's just too much coming at me, and I can't pick it apart. I can't figure out who that person is.
It's I listen to old violin. You listen to that song, and I remember going, golly, it's something's wrong with it. Like, there are parts where it doesn't sound right, and it's sung wrong, and the music didn't seem right. But I found myself drawn to it over and over and over. Mm-hmm. This stuff, this music, a lot of the stuff that comes out, you're right, it's just kind of like feed, like you to a cattle. It's just kind of like same old kind of.
Well, I think it works because of the way the system is set up. You get that play and you move forward, and everybody goes, well, I can do that again and again and again. But when something stands out, and I think it's hard when you're using all this data today. Everybody looks at all the information you get from all the digital service providers that you've got out there, the Apples and the Spotify. But the reality is, you just pointed out, you can hear something once, and then finally it clicks.
Yes.
And the way the system works today, it doesn't really. If you keep skipping, you don't get to hear anything.
Yep.
And again, there's so much coming at you, it's hard to kind of hold on to it. And that's where that class of '89, those voices were all different.
Mm-hmm.
They were all unique, and they were all the songs. I keep coming back to that. It's what makes our format, what makes our town, is the fact that we've got great songwriters, and we've had a tradition of great songs. And when you get this feeling that, it needs to fit the track as opposed to the song being crafted around everything that's around that. And going back to my point about the intros, again, there's a lot of stuff out there that's working really well, but I was in the job of trying to build a catalog. So, my job was, okay, so Jerry had signed Ronnie Millsap, so who's going to replace Ronnie Millsap? So Kenny Chesney, and then you go through and it's Brooks and Dunn, and you go through and it's Alan Jackson, and you build that up, and that's how your label becomes successful, because you've got a ton of these acts. The best catalog in this town is what exists in Sony, because it's the combination of RCA and all the Colombian epics. So it's Merle Haggard, it's Tammy Wynette, it's Charlie Pride, it's Ronnie Millsap, it's Eddie. you can go on, and Willie Nelson, Waylon Jennings, it just goes on and on and on and on. And that's how those labels become legendary, because they've got the best of. And I had run this meeting, and I used the George Jones line about who's going to fill their shoes. And I had the labels that I ran have half of the artists in the Hall of Fame. And not from me, but from our catalog.
Yep.
Some from me, but a lot from the catalog. And you go, well, who's going to take their place? Who are we working on that's going to fill their shoes? Because it's a valid question. Otherwise, if we're just delivering, one-off, we're not really building the format.
Nope.
You're keeping people's, they're happy. It's like vanilla ice cream. Everybody likes it, but it's not. Every once in a while, you want something that's going to give you a surprise, and I think that's what the label not the label. I'm sorry. What the format continues to need is that surprise.
And by the format, just for those, I think that aren't, it's the genre, the country music genre.
Yeah. And I think that's what Chris Stapleton did. That is a moment where I think we can all point to and go, because Chris was out there that album was out for 6 months. Yeah, I cut a bunch of his songs with various artists. Always when you got the demo, you just stopped. I remember pulling over on the side of the road and going, holy, what the? But at the end of the day, that album had been out for 6 months. I remember talking to Mike Dungan, who runs the label, and he said, we were dead in the water. Nothing was happening.
And people go, oh, radio only plays what they want you to hear. That's not true, because I was in here constantly begging people to listen to, don't you get it? Go listen to this. This is the best thing you've ever heard.
Patrick had Chris do his voicemail message. He was such a fan.
No, you had Chris do. I didn't do that. We did that to make
Leave
fun of
a message for Patrick.
Oh, it's amazing. But
that's a great goddamn idea.
It was really great. But I bought 10 copies of that album and gave them out to my close friends and family. And my brothers who love country music, my nephew and my cousins, they were all like, hey, this is pretty good. And I was like, no, it's not pretty good. Listen to it again. This is the best. What is wrong with you? And it just didn't click until
the performance.
It was on stage, and it was like, oh, okay, well, I get it now.
And why would you not have put out, because that always baffled me, after that performance, the fact that they did not put out Tennessee Whiskey
as the single. They had a single planned for the Monday following the awards, and I'll tell you, that's the biggest mistake I can think of from a promotion standpoint. I can't believe that wasn't a single.
You got in that, everybody was in setup mode. They had the record out there. They had it primed to go, and it was like, whoops, that's where the pivot comes in.
You have to be able to shift. You have to. And
but it's interesting you bring that up, because we were really frustrated when Martina was having, everything from Independence Day. Everything she was going through, those records were just enormous, but we could not get the female vocalist of the year. So I got really ticked off one day. And I said, okay, we're going to bundle the cassette in the Tennessean, because most of the voters lived in Tennessee. They lived in Nashville. But people in the business don't listen. You guys do. Yeah. But a lot of people that are there, they listen to their own artist or their own roster, but they don't get outside. And we sent that out, and all of a sudden, when the nominations came around, we got a bunch of them that we didn't have before, because people didn't realize what what the album was.
So you packaged her cassette
in the Tennessean paper.
The newspaper.
Yeah, when you got it, it was an additional. Actually, I stole the idea from the UK, because they used to do that all the time. They would put a cassette in there when I was overseas. I went, that's an interesting idea. And then realizing that most of the voters were here in Nashville, it was like, well, this is a no-brainer. I mean, why not go?
Really smart.
Those artists are great, but have you heard the Island Boys? No.
Okay, I know we're almost running out of time, and I'm sure Joe
when you leave, I want you to look up Island Boys.
Don't do that.
And listen to their
Island
music.
Boys.
They are stars.
I have a couple of things I have to ask before you go. One is, you're going into the Country Music Hall of Fame. We mentioned that earlier. One of the other artists going in this year, Keith Whitley, who you signed.
Yeah.
Tell us, what was like to us? Keith Whitley is like an icon. None of us ever met him. None of us were ever active in this when he was, still alive. But
we were most of us in general, I think, were introduced to his songs because they were sung by other people. And then you went back.
Oh no, I had that cassette. Don't Close Your Eyes. I wore it out like it didn't play anymore. But did you know it as soon as you saw him? I mean, he'd been around town for a while.
No, I mean the first album that came out, you know, we nothing. We got critical acclaim, and nobody was really interested. And then we got the second album, and we had Miami, and little by little we'd have a hit. And when I say a hit, I mean a relative hit, not something where people went, "Oh my God!" But what it did do is people began to hear his voice, and the breakthrough was "Don't Close Your Eyes," "I'm No Stranger to the Rain." When he passed away, that album was in being completed, and Garth Funders gave me the cassette, and I remember driving down Music Row and just pulling over on the side of the road and just bawling, because this was the moment. We had been 5 years into this, and the problem was Keith had a lot of demons to deal with, and most of it had to do with alcohol and the way he was raised. Not that he was raised badly, but just the exposure and being on a road at a really young age, you know. And just,
nobody tells you no?
Yeah, and you're with a bunch of grown guys. And
Yeah, he was playing bluegrass with,
you know,
like,
we're
all
going
those
to be
legends.
drinking. Here's
Yeah.
moonshine. We're going to go out and have a good time tonight, you know, and you're a kid. And I think that part of what happened was Laurie Morgan, who Keith introduced me to, we had signed, and Laurie was going out on the promo tour. And I was actually having lunch with Eddie Arnold in Moore's Courtyard on the row. And one of the staff came into me and whispered in my ear and said, you know, Keith died. And I'm looking at Eddie, and, you know, I kind of finished up the lunch and go back to the office because we had to find out where Laurie was. She was on the road. There were no cell phones back then. And so you could hear a radio station getting the news and going, Keith Whitley had passed away, and here's Laurie in a car.
Right.
Yeah.
So we found her in Seattle before the news got out there. She cut the promo tour. She came back. But Keith had a great sense of humor and could do imitations that were incredible. He had a smile that lit up the room, and everybody loved the guy. He just was so affable. But that alcohol, I mean, I actually suspended him one point because he had fallen off the wagon again. And, you know, he thought, oh, my God, my career is over. And actually, suspension just means I'm not going to put the record out. But he thought it was the end of his career. And I found out a lesson at that point because we sent him into rehab. And I found out that from an addiction standpoint, unless the person wants to do it, you can't change the behavior.
Right.
And so all we did was buy some time for him and for Laurie because he fell off the wagon again that night when he died.
I remember her saying she told me in another interview that she would tie like a bell around his ankle so she would know if he got up in the middle of the night to go drink in the middle of the night.
Well, how much was he drinking? Oh,
His
obviously a
blood
lot.
alcohol level when he died was 0.4. That's 5 times the legal limit. It's the equivalent of drinking like a bottle and a half of Jack Daniels in under an hour.
He was drinking everything in the house.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think there was a fear of being alone. I mean, if you stop to think for just 1 second, if he had lived and Laurie and Keith had been able to make music together, we'd have had George and Tammy for decades. I mean, I don't think there were finer country singers out there at that time, and they both had the story, the pedigree. I mean, and they were madly in love, and it was just so fun when we went to the wedding and everything. You know, just that big smile, and it was Keith. You know, Keith was in some ways, you know, the whole Harley attitude from the country. I mean, he was of the people, and he could play anything. I was sitting next to Gene Simmons from Kiss when we launched him in RCA at a convention, and I leaned over to him because I saw him. He was kind of bobbing his head and everything. I said, "What do you think of this?" And he said, "Anything that's great, I like." And that was before we really broke. I mean, but you could see it on stage because Keith had really reached that point where he had come into his own in terms of this is who I am, this is how I'm going to play it. And as a singer, we didn't have that sound. And that's why everybody comes out and does those covers. And there's a great respect for him.
It still happens today. We'll have brand new
I mean,
artists
Dylan
will come
Scott,
in.
who's on like his second record. He's on just had his or about to have his third #1 hit. He did a whole album of Keith Whitley covers because it's that big of a deal to artists of this.
Wasn't Tim?
age.
Didn't Tim say that it's the whole reason he came to Nashville?
Oh,
Tim,
yeah.
Garth, I mean, Chris Young, there were a bunch of people that and I mean, for me, that happened not too far after I had signed the Judds, and I had lots of people coming up to me and just going, "Oh my God, I love this music." In fact, I got a phone call one day. I was in the office. My assistant said, "Conway Twitty's on the line." And I had known Conway. We'd been out on the road and everything. Actually, out on the road, he had been there, and we were in England when Keith Wood and Laurie were over there. And he said to me, he said, "Son, you did a good thing." Click.
And then you have to figure out what good thing it was. Like you don't even.
No, he did. He started. There was the comment about the Judds, but that was about it. It wasn't anything more than that. But and that's for me, that is such a moment because you realize when you've got greats like that, or who we're talking about with Keith, it's like that's important for the format, and that comes back to that conversation. We need more of that.
Yeah.
Do you remember where you were and you heard about Naomi?
Yes. I was at my goddaughter's play, and I got a call from her manager, Greg Hill, and stepped outside, and he told me, and it was like, oh, no, because the next day was the Hall of Fame.
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
I've known Ashley since she was 13 years old. Why was 15, 16 when I signed her, with the braces and everything else and the high school friends that we used to hang out with. I mean, I've known that family since, 84, 85. So it's, it is heartbreaking. I mean, obviously you know the story and you know what's going on there, but she was an entertainer, and she was a songwriter, and she was a personality. And she was a big part of their success because I was a kid. She was a singer.
Yeah.
Unparalleled.
For sure.
Yeah.
But Mom would make those moments on stage where everybody just kind of leaned in. And that was another, wave of mothers and daughters and sisters going to shows that normally didn't show up before. They brought more people into the format.
Yeah.
So
It was such the Judds to me are one of the best sounds. I love the way they just, I don't know what's the just the blending of the voices or
and the guitar playing. Don Potter and Brent Mayer made those records. Again, we were talking about before. When a Judds record starts, instantly based on those guitars
and
it is.
And it goes back to what you said earlier. It sounds like everything's kind of the same. And when you have an intro that sounds, that guitar, it like cuts through. It's like I don't know. It's like higher pitch almost.
Yeah.
It's super trebly and cuts through, and it's gorgeous. And then they sing. Ugh.
And that was kind of the way especially when you go back to like the Storms of Life, the early,
I was about to say,
early Randy Travis.
People credit Randy Travis as being the turning point toward neo-traditional
But those
country.
intros,
but the
you
Judds
knew.
was before that.
Yeah. No, but I was going to say though, it's the same thing though. He's talking about those intros that you
Dwight
knew
Yoakam.
before they even said a word.
Dwight Yoakam might have been the best at the intro.
Oh God, Pete
Every
Anderson's
one of those
guitars.
Dwight Yoakam hits.
Oh, boy, those were great.
I just got in my head.
Williams intros.
I've got. I don't need your the rocking chair in my head. That opening. That boom, boom, boom. Golly.
Those are great. I mean, you just you know it as soon as they come on. I mean, that's one of the things I love is just going back and listening to that. And when you see them on the award show, the CMA Awards, it's Ronnie and Kicks. You just hear those records come on there, and you go, "Oh yeah,
Yep.
I know I'm in for a good time."
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. Well, I can't wait to see you next week when you come back in.
Okay, wait. Before you go, I heard you tell a story about when you first got to Nashville and you got pulled into Chet's office, Chet Atkins. If it's shareable, would you mind?
Yeah, it's shareable. So one of the things that I did back then was, we were trying to control some budgets, and Floyd Kramer came in, and he was a piano player, had a big record with Last Date, but instrumentalists were starting to die away at that point. So he came in, and he had an album cover where the piano was going to have embossed keys in foil, which, just as I say it, it's expensive.
Yeah,
everybody else is just printing colors. That's all you do. You take a picture and you put it in there, and you put the 4 colors in, the 5 colors, boom, you're done. This has got to be taken out. You've got to emboss it. Then you've got to color it. It's a lot of money. You don't sell a lot of records.
We're not doing this.
I'm not doing this. So I got a call. My assistant said to me, Chet wants to see you. So I went up there, and, Chet sits down, and he sit down. Okay. He said, you know, boy, he said, people don't like you here. I had been in Nashville maybe 18 months.
And you got called boy a lot.
I don't think you did. Maybe by Chet, but
Yeah.
not by anybody else.
Yeah. Even in spite of my size, that was one time. So he said that. He said, you know, you're from New York. You're Italian. You don't have any friends, so watch your step. Go. Okay. I go down and see Jerry, and Jerry has this thing when he doesn't want to give you bad news. He rubs his face and he talks. So he's down there rubbing his face, and he said, you see Chet? I said, God damn, yes, I did. What the hell? He said, well, he said, you know, Floyd is his brother-in-law. I said, don't you think I needed to know that before? Piece of information would have been good.
Yeah.
And then people always ask after we get through the whole thing, he said, did you approve the cover? I said, no, we didn't do the cover. No.
Okay, look at you.
Hey,
No,
it was still the right decision.
Yeah.
Still the right
and I
move.
mean, Floyd was a lovely man, and I didn't know. And I mean, at that point, then I started to dig further on things before I made decisions. You know what I mean? I was still trying to figure it out. Mistake on my part in terms of artist relations.
Oh, man, thank you so much.
It's been my pleasure. It's been a blast.
For
Joe
sure.
Gallanty, you can anything that we need to push for you? Like, I don't know. I don't feel like you've been given.
You got anything you want to
wanna-
promote? I know you're.
I know it's,
You know,
I have no agenda.
no agenda.
okay.
You know?
It's one of those rare moments.
All right.
Hey, Joe's going to go into the Hall of Fame
How cool
on
is this?
October the 16th. And
Yeah.
so you
Well
can watch
deserved.
that stream. It's always really interesting. And then you can go find his plaque. And I hope your plaque looks like you.
Oh, God. I think
Some of 'em-
Vince told that story last year. He said he went through and Tillis went and saw his plaque, and he looked at Vince and he said, Vince, he said, you kind of look like Lon Chaney, you know? and Vince told that story on the stage when he was talking about the plaques. And as always, Vince is just the master of it.
Yes.
But
Some of those
thank you.
plaques look a lot like the people
God,
they're
yeah.
supposed to, and
Some
some of them
do
don't.
not.
And you just got to hide, just, oh, God.
Oh, wow, this is amazing.
Looks so good.
I'm sure it'll be great.
I'm
I
sure
mean,
it will.
I still can't believe it, and I'm completely humbled by the whole thing.
Congratulations.
Thank you
for
very much.
coming in.
Anytime, guys. All right.
Bye-bye.
We're done?
Wait, we
Okay.
got to play the song.
Okay, one more. And are you going to sing
I'm going to
out?
sing along.
What?
Because the
This
worst he can do
was
is
the
leave.
podcast, but
Now
now
it's
it's over. But that's okay,
okay.
because you can listen to the regular show on the radio every day. It was the podcast.
Someone signed that kid.